This meeting is being recorded. All right, welcome everybody. I'm Tracy Sprower from Met How at Home, and I'm really excited to have Annika Mines here today, a good friend of mine for many, many years and an incredible farmer who's growing seed at the Twist River Seed Farm now to talk to us about gardening with seeds in mind. And because it's that time where we're thinking about our seeds and our gardens and what we want to plant this year. So welcome, and I'm just gonna hand it right over to you, Annika, and we'll just work together here.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. I know some of you, and I've not met some of you. So Tracy had the idea of me kind of introducing myself partly through a video that the Conservancy did of my farm about 5 years or almost 6 years ago, maybe, because I think 6 years ago, in the summertime. So I just by way of brief introduction, I don't have a huge presentation prepared. Tracy and I talked about just kind of introducing my farm, and then I could say a few things about what I do, and then have sort of a Q&A more style interaction about gardening in the Met How, and then also growing seeds if anyone's interested in learning more about how to grow seeds. And then also just wanting to point out that there's probably people in this group that have been gardening a lot longer than me, and so I don't need to be the only expert in the room. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have more experience than me, so we can share the mic in that way. And I'll go ahead and share this video of Twist River Seed. That the name of my farm is Twist River Seed, and I'm 3 miles up Twist River on the flats up from Twist. So let's see. I'm going to share this video. Can you guys see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see if I go like this.
My name is Annika Mines, and this is Twist River Seed. Twist River Seed has been going on for about 4 years, and we grow vegetable, flower, and herb seed for wholesale. So we sell to companies that retail seed, that make, put them in packets or sell in bulk to farmers, but we don't sell directly to farmers except just giving it away to friends, neighbors, stuff. Yeah. This year we've started to kind of fantasize about the idea of doing some retail seed of our own. And I'm interested in creating seed that is genetically, linked to this landscape and this bioregion. I have a background in botany. I'm very interested in kind of the whole physiology and phrenology of plants, not just getting a nice vegetable. And so that's part of how I got into seed, is that I'm kind of more interested in the botany than a table full of pretty vegetables. With seed, you're going through the whole cycle of the plant's life, and you're learning about how things get pollinated and where the seed grows, where is the ovary in that plant, and where is the seed going to come out, and how do you get it out of there, and how do you clean it? And there's just all these steps in the seed growing process that's different than vegetables that I think is really interesting and fun. And so that's part of why I do it. My focus here is really on like high quality vegetable seed. And so part of that is making sure that I'm growing in an organic system that's somewhat similar to what the system would be for other organic farmers who might buy my seed. I practice kind of the organic systems of crop rotation and applying lots of organic matter to my soil, and I compost. All my crops are open pollinated. I don't have the facilities and technology to do hybrid seed. And so I'm interested in maintaining open pollinated varieties and improving them. You can't just have a variety and then it's good forever. It's like somebody has to grow it, and somebody has to keep selecting it, or else it kind of deteriorates over time. So you got to be working on things and making them better. It's kind of, I have almost a little bit of a beef with the heirloom seed movement, because it sort of presumes that all the best things are 50 or 100 years ago, Whereas that's not true. Like the best things are now and to come. We are still working. Plant breeding is an ongoing process. Even if we didn't have human caused climate change, things always change in nature. And so you're always adapting and you always have to keep working on things.
All right. That's kind of
Yeah,
an
it's fun. It's fun to see you with Sage on your back there.
I know,
And
right? He's so tiny. He's 6 years old. He weighs like 55 pounds now. So he doesn't go on my back all that often anymore. Yeah, so I'm just gonna put this up here so you can see it. This is I do offer retail seed now again. Like that packet that shows in the video was sort of an attempt 6 years ago to try it, but we didn't really go anywhere with it. But now, starting last year, me and a couple other farmers up Frost Road started this Methow Valley Seed Collective, and now we have these packets that we offer retail seed locally. So most of you might know that already, but that's what it looks like. Is that backwards for you or just for me?
No.
it's actually forwards for us. I know it's
Okay.
kind of an interesting
It's
thing.
confusing. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, you kind of saw my farm there. It doesn't look all that different 6 years later. It's just you know, small blocks of different crops that I grow for seed. I don't know if you noticed the white flowers that had one of them had a bumblebee like crawling all over it. Does anyone have any idea what seed was going to be created from that white flower? I know you know.
It looked like Queen Anne lace.
Exact same species, but it's a vegetable that's the same species as Queen Anne lace. Any idea?
Carrot.
Carrot. Yeah, exactly. It's a carrot.
Carrot.
Carrots will cross with Queen Anne's lace. So actually on the west side of the mountains here, it's really hard to grow carrot seed because there's so much Queen Anne's lace as a weed, and it will cross into your carrot seed and wreck your variety. It will deteriorate the quality of your carrot variety over time if you get a bunch of Queen Anne's lace pollen mixed in there. So yeah, so it's fun. One of the fun things about growing seed is you get to learn, like I said, about the whole life cycle of the plant. And one of the funnest is carrots, because when they go to flower, they have an incredible diversity of pollinators that are attracted to them. And so if you're interested in wild bees, you will see, and not just bees, ants, wasps, flies, all kinds of cool creatures come to carrot flowers. And it's really fun to just stand there and you can just stare at the flowers and you'll see 30 species go by your field of vision in like 10 minutes on a good day. So it's pretty fun. And that's one of the things I love about seed growing. And yeah, just like I said in that video too, I just try to kind of work with sort of a kind of standard organic protocol on my farm so that the plants that the methods that I'm using to grow these plants are adapting them to those methods, so that other organic growers can grow them and they will be adapted to organic conditions. Whereas in the industrial plant breeding world, a lot of times they're breeding for really specific, I mean, in the most extreme case with GMOs, they're breeding for the tolerance of a certain herbicide, so you can just plant stuff and then spray the crap out of it with herbicides and it won't die and the weeds will. You know, that's the GMO model. And then, but just with more traditional, conventional, or I hate the word conventional, but like commercial, non-organic systems, they will breed for really specific traits, like really specific resistance to certain diseases. And then that will last for like a couple of years and they'll have to breed something new because it's too specific. And in nature, the disease organism will adapt in a few years to that resistance, and then it won't work anymore. And so with kind of organic plant breeding, you're trying to breed for broader health and vigor rather than like really specific resistance to disease, and that creates just healthy, vigorous plants. And some will get disease and some won't, and it's more organic. Yeah. And so I guess I'm not really sure, Tracy, what you're thinking, if we want to just kind of, if people have questions or thoughts they want to bring up in terms of like, how do I get started with a garden, or like really specific questions about seeds and crop varieties.
I know, I was thinking to keep it organic. In that sense, but I mean, one question just popping into my mind, and I'm just going to open it up for folks to be able to ask you questions, and we'll kind of just go follow the different threads. But when you talk about breeding for health and vigor, like, what does that look like? How do you actually do that? Is that you choosing the best, plant to gather the seed from, or?
Yeah, I mean, it could be a long or a short answer. Yes, you got it. That's what it is. You're just selecting the ones that do the best is like the short answer. On my farm, like I said, I've been growing for other companies for most of the last 10 years that I've been doing this. And in that situation, they send me the stock seed that they want me to grow. So for instance, a carrot, they would send me seed from the carrot variety they want me to grow. And then I would grow seed for that variety. And with carrot, yeah, I would just, the word is rogue. So when you find something that you don't like, you rogue it, which means you just kill it so it doesn't cross-pollinate with anything else. And so with a carrot, you might rogue a few just because they're like wimpy or they don't grow very well. And well, with a carrot, it's a biennial, so you have to do 2 seasons. So you plant the carrot seed and grow carrots, and then you dig them all up. And in that part of the process, you can pick out the ones that are the most cylindrical and depending on the variety, like you're trying to retain the characteristics that the variety is bred for. So with Scarlet Knots carrots, for instance, they're bred to have blunt tips and to be fairly cylindrical, not tapered. And then just generally like the kind of vigorous and the right size, kind of by the end of the season, not like gargantuan, but not like, too small. So yes, you take the carrots that you just harvest everything, wash it, and just look at it all. And then you pick out the ones that you think are the most beautiful. And then the next year you're going to plant those. And then in the second season, yeah, it's just kind of, you might rogue a few for lack of vigor if they don't grow. When you plant a carrot in the ground in the spring, with it'll grow green carrot looking leaves, but then really quickly it will grow a central stalk as well. That's the flower, and that flower will bloom, and then the carrot itself, the orange part will kind of turn woody and you can't eat it anymore. But the flowers will bloom and get pollinated. They're insect pollinated. So there's a lot of crossing, and then they'll get pollinated, and then the seeds will form on the flowers. And with, like I said, with carrots, they're very apt to cross pollinate. So you have to be really careful. Like if you have a neighbor, if you're trying to grow carrot seed, if you have a neighbor that's like has Queen Anne's lace in their garden, or they're letting their carrots go to flower too, and it's a different variety, you want to be careful of that, because you don't want other varieties getting crossed into your carrots. It will deteriorate them over time. And the other thing with like plant breeding, so there's kind of maintenance plant breeding, and then there's like improvement. And so what I do mostly with my companies is I'm just doing maintenance. It's like I'm just making sure that it's not deteriorating. I'm just picking the best of what I grow and like keeping it from deteriorating. I haven't done a whole lot of breeding, except for I did introduce my own variety of yellow storage onion this year. It's called Golden Morning. It's for sale. You can get it from my website or at the store, at different stores in town. And I took 3 different onion varieties. I took like 20 different onion varieties and grew them all out and to trial them and see how they all looked and how they did in our climate. And then I did taste testing with them to see which ones, like I gathered like 7 people together and we taste tested them. And then I picked out ones that kind of had the best results in the taste test and also had, like, did really well in the field and were disease resistant. And then I planted those bulbs out to go to flower and I let them cross. So I made a cross of different varieties. And that would be a breeding project where I'm actually like trying to like make a new variety. And I've been working on it for 10 years because biennials are slow to breed because you only get to like do something every other year. The first cross I made, I abandoned because I ended up finding that one of the things I crossed in was really vulnerable to thrips in the garden. It was just like the next year that variety did really poorly. And so I was like, okay, I'm starting over. And then I started over and I took 2 really disease resistant varieties and one that was like the top producer and taste test winner. And I crossed those. So then I've basically been selecting the best from that cross for, I guess it's 8 years, so like 4 generations.
Hmm.
And it's really a nice, super solid yellow storage onion. And that's kind of the only actual breeding project I've done. Because
And
I was
that's called Golden Morning. What's the name
Yeah.
of it again?
Golden Morning. Yeah, it's in my, I haven't like offered it to other seed companies or anything. It's just available from us.
Uh-huh.
But I
we
work
have-
with the onion breeder at Johnny's a little to like, he's a friend of mine that I've met at lots of conferences and he kind of helped me like plan my trials that I did and figure out how to like evaluate the different varieties and stuff as I was working on the breeding project. So that was really helpful. Yeah.
Interesting. We do have Alyssa has her hand up here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm curious with your biennials, how do you store the root crops that you're going to need to plant the next spring?
Yeah, I have a really nice root cellar that we built a bunch of years ago that maintains a really steady temperature. It's been really tricky in the last few years to get it cold enough in the fall. Especially this fall, goodness, it was like in the 80s at the end of October. But once the weather turns, we have a fan. It's very passive. We don't have like a air conditioner, any way of cooling it except for turning a fan on at night. And but it gets cool in there, and I've had really good success storing anything that I need to store, both onions, carrots, parsnips, beets that are biennials that I grow for seed. And it's nice to have, one of the things that my kind of mentor in the seed growing was this guy called Frank Morton, who grows seed near Corvallis, Oregon. And we always talked about, not babying your seed crops, because you want them to have like resilience and vigor, and not just like throw tons of compost and tons of fertilizer. And then you're going to end up, if you're babying them, you're not kind of orienting them towards like finding the ones that do well under like marginal conditions. You're selecting for ones that are just like able to grow well if you like really baby them. And so we talked about how we had a certification for our seed, TAMF, which stands for tough ass motherfucker. So the seed was TAMF certified, which means that like, they got eaten by bugs. There was like sclerotinia in the soil. There was, all kinds of disease pressure because, the fields had been used for a while, and there's pressure on them so that they have to perform under that pressure. And then you can pick the ones that actually have like these strong genetic qualities. And so that's something that I think about. I mean, you also want good yields if you're growing a crop to sell. And so it helps to like have good fertility and good soil health, if you want to have good yields. So it's a balance, but it's something that I think about when I'm growing mine. So, and the reason I brought that up, Alyssa, is that in storage too, like you want really good storage conditions, but they don't have to be perfect, because then if the few that the ones that do really well in storage, you're selecting for storage quality. So if 50% of the roots do really well through the whole winter in storage, and 50% of them maybe are a little marginal or rot, then you know which ones you get to select at the end of the season. Those ones have like some particular storage quality. And a lot of times what's cool is with something like a beet or a carrot, they're going to store better with more sugar, because sugar is a preservative. So it's also could potentially be something that makes your food taste better as well. That selection for storage.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, fire away, guys. Any questions for Annika? And it can be general too, about what thinking about where you're at right now, what you could be doing to start your garden, or more technical.
Well, I have a simple question. I think it's a simple question, Annika. What kind of carrots are you growing? What variety are you contracted to grow?
I have a bunch of different varieties that I grow. I'll just start with my personal favorite variety of carrot is Scarlet Nonce. I've been selecting the Scarlet Nonce that I grow. I've been selecting since like 2008 or something, and it's just awesome. It's delicious, super sweet, gets really big, it stores really well. It's just a bomber carrot for gardeners. It's definitely a garden / small scale farm carrot. I think the tops aren't strong enough to be harvested by a machine, so it's not a carrot that's going to be grown by like a mega farm, but it's really delicious and awesome. So that's my favorite variety, and I grow that periodically. Seed lasts, like you don't have to grow every kind of seed every year, because it lasts for years. In some cases 10, 15 years, in some cases 5 years. Different things last a different amount of time. The only thing we've had not last is parsnips. Parsnips this only last like 1 year. And onions are supposedly don't last, but that's not my experience. If you read about it, everyone says onions don't last, but in my experience, they last like 5 years if they're stored well. So, yeah. So the other carrots that I've grown, there's a variety called Dragon that's like kind of dark reddish purple on the outside and orange in the middle, and it's my favorite like dark colored carrot that I've had. There's a lot of different varieties, but a number of them are hybrids too. Like some of the ones you can get from the seed companies are hybrids, and this one's an open pollinated dragon, and I think it's really nice. And then I grow a yellow one called Yellowstone, which is really a vigorous, beautiful plant, and it grows big carrots. I'm not super partial to them. They're not as flavorful. I mean, none of them are as good as Scarlet Nonce. Like there's no carrot that tastes as good. They look cool, but they don't taste as good. So I'm sort of partial to the ones that taste really good. And then there's a one that I grow called Tonda di Parigi, which is it's an heirloom from France, and I think it's France. Yeah. Or maybe. Yeah. Anyway, it's like a golf ball. And it's another one where it's like, it's really, if you're like a fancy chef, it's fun to like roast little golf ball size, carrots, but it's kind of pointless in the Met-How. I think one of the reasons it was bred is for people who have incredibly like dense clay soil, and we do not. We have sandy, silty soil in the Met-How, and there's no problem. I mean, unless you have a really unique location or like a super gravelly, rocky spot, there's no problem with a cylindrical carrot like getting sized up in the Met-How. So it's not really a variety that I highly recommend for Met-How growers, but it's kind of cute if you like fancy stuff.
If you get kind of hairy carrots, what What's going, I mean, I've gotten
Yeah.
just a lot of hair.
Yeah,
What-
usually with hairy carrots, it's usually a nitrogen issue. Like if you have too much nitrogen in your soil, they're gonna put out root hairs along the edges of the carrots to suck up the nitrogen. When you plant root crops like carrots and beets, you want to do lots of compost, but not a lot of nitrogen. And that will encourage like good root growth.
Okay,
Smooth roots, but not like a lot of hairs on them. That's my experience. I mean, they need a little bit of nitrogen. All plants need some nitrogen, but they'll get some from compost. And yeah, that just being careful not to over fertilize them with a nitrogen rich fertilizer. And then maybe you have a part of the garden that like you had chickens in or something where it's like just not, it's got a high nitrogen in it just because of some other reason, and you're not even adding fertilizer, but maybe don't put your carrots in that part of the garden.
right. Okay, great. And we can get your Scarlet Knot seed at Glover Street right now, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Where else can we get your seed?
It's at the
then
Mazama
I see-
store.
Poor man plants.
Poor man plants.
True value.
Twist feed, yeah, Ace and Winthrop, twist
Ace.
feed,
Yeah.
and I think that's it. Poor man, yeah.
So
Glover.
I have a
Okay,
question.
great. Yeah, Terry.
So Annika, you said that when you store your carrots and then you find which are good to save, and then after, do you have really good records, or can you use those carrots to grow seed? You know, like plant the carrot, put it in water. You remember when you did it with, I don't know, we always did it with the kids. You cut the carrot off. and
Yeah.
It grows. Or do you just
well-
keep good records?
No, that's the ones I plant. The very best ones are the ones I plant. And you don't have to do the cutting and putting them in water and all that business. That's just for kids. For farmers, you just take the carrot and you stick it in the ground
Ah,
in April.
Okay.
Yeah.
ah.
You don't need to, and it'll grow a plant. Yeah. I mean, kids can do it the farmer way too, but it's just it's like a kid's activity book thing where you cut but you don't need to do that to grow carrot seed. Yeah.
Or you could also potentially just leave them in the ground, right? I mean, obviously for you who are a professional, you are going to want to see what's the best and who's doing the best in storage. But if
Right.
you're just like at home and you want to save your seed, you could potentially leave some in the ground.
Absolutely. And that, that's fun with carrots to leave them in the ground, both for seed, and you can actually leave them in the ground and then have carrots to eat in early spring as soon as the snow melts. They're still really good until they start kind of going to flower, and then they don't taste good anymore. But for the first like month after the snow melts, they're really good. It is a risk. I mean, part of why I don't do that as well is that sometimes we'll get temps in the, teens or 10, whatever it's called, less than 10, and before snow falls. And when that happens, the top inch of the carrot can freeze, and then the growing tip can be killed, and then it won't grow the next year. So it's not 100% to leave your carrots in the ground in this climate. Sometimes they will get killed. Yeah. Something like a parsnip basically can survive anything. It can survive 0 with no snow. But a carrot, I'd say under like 10, it's pretty much surely going to be killed if there's no snow on the ground. And some people like cover them with a bunch of mulch, which works, but not as well as snow. Snow is much better insulator than mulch. And yeah, I mean, for me too, it's really important to make that selection. But if you want to grow carrot seed on your own and you accidentally leave some carrots over winter and then they go to flower, you can totally collect that seed and use it. It'll be great seed. I think it's more important, like I said, with the maintenance thing, is that for me, I'm going to be then growing seed and then growing seed and then growing seed again. And if you were to do that with your garden where you let it go to seed without selecting, and then you planted those and then let those go to seed without selecting, and then again, you will start finding that your variety will deteriorate. It basically like sort of inches back to its like more wild form over
Hmm.
time.
Mm,
You'll start losing
Interesting.
some of the traits that were selected over time by, millennia of farmers to get that like cylinder with the blunt tip that's got extra sugar and all that. Like all those traits will start. It would take a long time to like get back to the wild ancestor, but like you will start losing quality, to a small degree over time. But if you're just doing it the one time and you get a whole bunch of seed, that seed will be good and you could totally use it in your garden. And I definitely encourage everyone to just, when something just goes to seed, just save it. And same with like something like lettuce, if I'm growing lettuce in my garden for seed, I'm gonna plant a whole bunch, 100 heads of lettuce or more. And then if a couple of them go to seed early, I'll rogue those because we want our lettuce to not bolt early, right? We want our lettuce to stay good longer. But a lot of times home gardeners will leave one of those plants and save some seed off of it. And again, you're going to be selecting for a trait that's not good. So I don't recommend doing that over time, but if you do it once, it's probably not a big deal because there's a lot of genes in a seed, it's more complicated than like, if you select that, it's just like gonna always be an early bolting. But if you do that over time, you are going to start deteriorating the quality of your seed. And if you're consciously wanting to save lettuce seed, leave the very last one to bolt, wait till the end when you've harvested everything and then let that last one bolt and collect seed from it, because then you're going to get the highest, the slowest bolting one in your patch. And with lettuce, you could save seed off just one plant because it's a self-pollinated variety. So that means that within the flower, there's, I don't know if you all remember from like school biology, but there's a male part and a female part. There's an ovary with the with the stigma at the end. And they call it the pistil, right? And then there's stamens around it that have pollen, little anthers with pollen on them. And some plants open up wide and bugs come and get pollen on them and they carry it to other places or the wind blows it. Some flowers don't open all the way when the pollen gets ripe, and the pollen from that flower actually just goes straight to the pistil of the same flower. We call them in the seed world, we call them selfers, which means they self-pollinate. And there's no genetic crossing between. I mean, there is some crossing even because the this egg and the sperm are slightly different from each other within the one plant. So there's a little mixing that happens in there, but it's inbreeding, but because that species is used to inbreeding over many years, then the what we call the deleterious traits that come with inbreeding end up getting selected out, they die. And so you have a lot of resilience to inbreeding in those species. And so, so you could take a lettuce because it's a selfer and you could just save seed from one plant and you're not going to end up with like a whole lot of like inbreeding problems because you're only doing one plant. Whereas with a carrot or a beet or corn, corn is really notorious for what we call inbreeding depression, where if you only have like 10 plants and you save seed off just 10 plants, you're going to end up expressing a lot of deleterious inbreeding traits. Kind of like in humans, they say that if you inbreed, you get like albinism or I can't remember from Mendelian genetics class, but there's traits that, you get if you like from the royalty that used to always marry their cousins and all that, and they'd end up being weak and because you end up with deleterious recessive traits because you're combining the same family. But with plants, the ones that are naturally inbreeding, they don't have those because it's over, millennia, they have adapted to being inbreeding, and it's not detrimental to them. And those are actually some of the easiest plants to start with as seed saving plants because you don't have to worry about having big populations. Like lettuce is really good. And even easier are like peas and beans. They're self-pollinated mostly. I mean, with almost everything, there can be some crossing, like with all of these things, like like with lettuce, you can make them cross, or if they're like right next to each other and you like take the flower heads and rub them together, you'll get some crossing. But they don't naturally cross a lot. And same with beans, peas. Most tomato varieties barely cross. They will a little, and same and peppers and eggplant, they barely cross. They do most of their pollination is self-pollination. So
That's great. Alyssa has had her hand up here for a
I see
while,
that.
so.
Oh yeah, no rush at all. But yeah, I have two questions now, actually. One is, are there any crops that you have to physically isolate in order to get the seed in the direction you want? And secondly, are there any methods you recommend for water conservation?
Okay. Yeah, so isolation is a big part of my life. Trying to figure out, how much things need to be isolated from each other. Like I said, things that are self-pollinated do not need much isolation. Like when I grow lettuce for seed, I will only I'll grow a couple beds and then I'll put something else, and then the next bed will be another lettuce variety, and I won't worry about them crossing. So I'm just separating them by like 10 feet, 15 feet. Tomatoes I separate by like 50 feet. Peppers by like 500 feet. It just depends on the thing. Squash, things that are highly cross-pollinating: carrots, squash, beets, corn. I have separate gardens that are like at least a half a mile apart that I would plant those at to keep them from crossing. And then there is the issue of neighbors that have gardens and stuff like that. So something like a squash, which is totally insect pollinated and a lot of times pollinated by honeybees. Honeybees will fly up to 2 miles to collect pollen and nectar for their hive. And so you can't be sure that you're going to be able to keep your variety pure with a squash without if it was like an acre of squash, you would want to be at least 2 miles from other squash. If there was with another acre, but if it's like 10 plants, you'd want to be like at least a quarter mile away from, if not a half mile, to avoid getting cross-pollinated. You can also hand pollinate squash, which is fun and not that hard, but it takes time and effort. But yeah, so that's isolation is very much variable crop to crop. And supposedly beets are wind pollinated. Beets are so cool. If you ever get a chance to grow a beet to flower, the flowers don't look like anything. You can't even tell it's a flower, but it has the most unbelievable fragrance. Which I've always not understood, because beets are wind pollinated. I don't understand why they would be so fragrant. But it's just like amazing, the fragrance. And then, yeah, supposedly they're wind pollinated. When I worked down in the Willamette Valley, they grow sugar beet seed there, GMO sugar beet seed. And it was a real issue for my boss, Frank, because the beet pollen is super duper light. And so it can travel on the wind like 6 miles. And it was really hard for him to keep his beet and chard crops. So chard is the same species as beet. So it was really hard for him to keep his crops isolated from these giant sugar beet seed farms. Because, he's certified organic. And if you get GMO pollen in your certified organic seed, you can't sell it as organic. Anyway, it's a real big issue for him. And in the Willamette too, it's kind of interesting. It's a big seed growing area. And so is actually the Skagit. I don't know if you all probably know this, but the Skagit is one of the biggest seed producing regions in the world. And they grow, I think it was like 80% of the world's table beet seed. And they grow a ton of spinach seed. They grow a lot, and a lot of brassicas like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower seed, and things that kind of cooler climate things. They do really well with their spinach. They do a lot of spinach breeding there. So I lost my train of thought. The beets. Oh yeah. So yeah, beets beets are cool, but they're supposedly need to be isolated even more than other things. Again, it's kind of more of an issue if you have like acres of it. And in the Willamette, one of the cool things they did is they would actually gather, the seed growers would gather in the Willamette, and they would put maps up, and they would like organize themselves with maps of their different plots and try to like collaborate on keeping their different seed crops isolated from each other. So that was kind of a cool thing. I never got
Wow.
to go to one of those meetings, but I thought it was an interesting part of the seed world that I didn't know anything about. I mean, the thing that's
You
cool
never
about
know what goes into things until
Yeah.
you're like on the ground floor.
Totally. I mean, I didn't know anything until, when you first garden or even farm, most farmers, I think, you just get the seed packet in the mail and you just plant. You don't think about where it came from at all. You just comes in the mail or from the rack at the store, and you just plant it, You don't, there's so much that goes into it you don't really think about.
Yeah, other questions out there?
Oh, I didn't answer Alyssa's second question.
Oh, right.
Observation.
She said something about irrigation. It's a good conversation to have. I think, water is a big, huge deal around here and around the world. I am very conservative with water, and it's largely because I grow seed. I use almost all drip irrigation because I don't want to be overhead watering my seeds once they start ripening. So it's just convenient and kind of almost necessary for me to use drip irrigation, and it's incredibly efficient. I don't use very much water at all. It's incredibly plastic intensive, which I don't like. I do buy the 15 mil stuff instead of the 6 mil stuff, so that I've had my drip irrigation. I'm still using irrigation I bought the first year I started drip, which was 7 years ago. So I do get a lot of use out of it, but some of the original stuff is starting to get to the point of the landfill pretty soon. But it's very efficient. And if you're using I work off of an unpiped ditch. And so the water is kind of dirty. It's pretty silty. And that is a problem with using drip irrigation. Your drip lines will not last if you use really silty water in them for multiple seasons. They will, all the little holes will plug up. Ed, I don't know if y'all know, probably most of y'all know Ed Welch and Vicki Welch, but they used to farm right next to me, and Ed used drip for a couple seasons and was gave up on it. He was always like, you can't use drip on the Twist River. It just clogs up. But when I was in Corvallis, I learned about using different filtration systems. And in order to use drip, I have it's called a sand media filter, which might be impractical for someone who just has a small garden, but because it was kind of a little bit expensive to set up, but it's for pools. It's for for backyard pools to keep the water clean in your swimming pool. And it's a big tank that's full of sand. Basically, you just buy sand at the hardware store and you fill it, and it passes all the water through the sand, and the sand filters it. And it comes out really clean. So I use that to keep my drip lines clean, and it works. So far it's worked really well.
What's the difference between drip line and T-tape, or are you doing soaker hose?
No, I use T-tape. Yeah. T-tape is what I use. Yeah. There are other kinds of drip, and something like a soaker hose might be more practical for a garden. You can't use 200, 300, 400 feet of soaker hose. It won't work. I don't know what the limit is, but I think they only work up to I don't know, maybe Dana knows. I think he uses some soaker hose, but 30 feet or something maybe would be. It lets so much water out. By the time you get 30 feet, there's no pressure left, and it just kind of peters out. Drip tape is designed more for commercial use, and it will retain pressure. I know Frank's farm, we had T-tape going on 600-foot bed. No, I think we only did 300 feet at a time. We had another header that went down the middle, so that we had 300 feet and then 300 feet. But yeah, on my farm, I think the most I've done is 220 feet or something. But yeah, soaker hoses can be great, I think, for small gardens, in terms of efficiency. Yeah, because especially in the summertime here, it's hot. And if you are spraying, like I use a lot of micro sprinklers too in my garden and stuff. And they spray a fine spray, which is really great for like being gentle on the plants, but all that little fine spray is very prone to evaporation. So you definitely wasting a lot of water with that. But setting up drip irrigation is time consuming too. So, but it definitely is great. A lot of plants like it. There's some plants I think that don't love it. Like I think like some of the brassicas, some of the like things that like to be cooler, like lettuce and brassicas, if you're just growing them in the garden. I know lettuce seems to do fine on drip, but I think it almost likes like just being cooled off. Whereas with drip, you're never cooling anything off. You cool the soil, but you don't cool the plant off at all.
Mhm.
So that's one issue with drip. I find it like broccoli doesn't love it as much, unless you have like a shadier spot.
How much do you use mulch? That's another way to just like protect the water and watering and get the most out of your water. And what do you use for mulching?
I don't do a whole lot of mulching on my farm. It's just like too big of a scale. I rely on like weeding by hand and just having enough water because of the drip irrigation. I feel like I can keep stuff wet pretty easily. Because it's just a matter of like turning valves on and off. It's not like I have to go move sprinklers around and stuff. So it's not in my garden, I use mulch because I kind of have like a garden that I grow food in, because my farm isn't really growing a lot of food. But some of it is like, I don't get to eat because it has to go to flower and go to seed. So in my garden, one of my favorite mulch story is I discovered a few years ago, like it's pretty hot here for leeks. Like leeks do really well, like in Olympia, but here they can kind of be a little wimpy. The last few years, I discovered that if you have a lawnmower with a bag, you collect all the lawn clippings when you mow your lawn. And then after your leeks, like transplant your leeks when they're, little, and then give them like a month to kind of get established and get like, not that big. They're like this big, and they're like maybe like pencil size. And then just take your lawn clippings and just pile lawn clippings in between each row of leeks, like, like 4 or 5 inches deep. I've just had the best leeks since I've done that, like big, fat, tall leeks. They love that. So that's my favorite mulching story. I don't use a ton of mulch, just like I put a lot of compost down. I mix compost in before I plant. And so I try to have a lot of organic matter in my soil, but like laying down mulch after I've planted, I don't do a ton of. I aspire to it, but I don't do a lot. I think grass clippings are one of the best mulch. They have a lot of nitrogen, surprising amount of nitrogen in them, because they're green. Whereas if you put a whole bunch of brown mulch on, then sometimes you can do a little bit of nitrogen robbing from the soil. Another thing that you have to be careful of is something like peppers or tomatoes. If you do too much mulching with like straw or something that's really reflective, you can cool the soil so much that like peppers and tomatoes and like melons, they want the soil hot. They're going to thrive a lot more if the soil is warm. And so you might negatively affect your yields if you use too much mulch on some of those really hot loving crops. So I think mulch is great, but you have to be a little careful. Also, if you use a lot of wood chips or something like that, when things decompose, they need like 1 part nitrogen to 30 parts carbon. That's like the rule of you're not supposed to say rule of thumb. It's the rule. And if you put a whole bunch of like wood chips in your garden, it's just pure carbon. There's no nitrogen in wood chips. And so it's going to end up taking nitrogen out of your soil in order to decompose those wood chips. And that's not necessarily going to benefit your plants. Wood chips might be good for like perennials, like raspberries or something, but if you're putting them on your annual leaf, especially like leafy crops that need a lot of nitrogen, like in general, if you're eating green leaves, those are crops you want a lot of nitrogen, like lettuce, broccoli. Well, you don't eat the leaves, but broccoli or eating something green. They like a lot of nitrogen. So if you start putting like super carbony stuff and mixing too much of that in the soil, you're going to be robbing nitrogen. Yeah, so you have to be a little careful about that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dana? You're over there smiling and not saying anything.
I mostly, I agree with what you're saying. And actually right down the line, because I aspire to mulch, especially finer mulch, not wood chips. But mulch is so good for the soil, but everything is work, as you know, best of all. Putting mulch down takes a lot of time, and then you can't weed. If the weeds come up through the mulch, you can't use a hoe because so it's a trade-off. But all in all, I like the idea of mulch. I just don't do it.
Any other questions out there? I have a question. You know, I love braiding sweetgrass. A lot of us have probably read Braiding Sweetgrass. We've heard about growing the Three Sisters, and I've heard people, you know, report various results with trying to grow the Three Sisters, bean, squash, corn together. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts on the best varieties to choose or for this place.
That's a good question, Tracy. I definitely experimented with the Three Sisters a lot when I ran Classroom in Bloom, because, you know, low stakes gardening there. At home, I don't really do it too much. I mean, I do, like, a lot of times I'll plant my squash next to my corn. And then especially like a long vining variety, because you want it to be able to vine without having to like mess around with keeping it from like taking over other stuff. And so keeping in mind like the growth habits of each thing and where you put them near each other. So I will do that. I've never really found like a lot of success with pole beans like thriving on corn. But yeah, I don't I'm still in, I'd say I kind of love the idea of pole beans, and I love those dang scarlet runner beans that Susan Koptenak's always growing off the side of the road by the twist ponds. I mean, they're just they're so beautiful. And then the seed is amazing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with scarlet runner bean seed, but it's the most beautiful seed. Yeah, I aspired to learning more about pole beans. I did a big pole bean grow out a couple years, like I did a whole bed where I took hog wire and I made a big arch with T-posts and a big arch. So it was like 8 feet tall. And then I planted both sides. And so the pole beans could grow up and there was like a whole tunnel, like a 150-foot tunnel with pole beans. And it was really cool, but like, I just don't get good yields on pole beans. I think our season is just short for pole beans. Like pole beans do really well in longer season climates. And, you know, they're super frost sensitive. So there's no like wiggle room on either end of the season for frost. As soon as there's any frost, it's just like they're just dead, you know? And so, yeah, I don't know. And interestingly, I collected, so there was this one variety called Greasy Grits that like I read about, and it sounded like really tasty. It's a dry bean variety, a pole bean that you collect for dry beans. And it's supposed to be this really tasty dry bean, which I haven't even cooked it yet. I grew it 2 years ago. But it didn't pass the germination test. Like we grew it and then it only germinated at like 50% when we collected the seed, and almost all our beans germinated 100%. Like we have really good success with beans, bush beans. And yeah, so I find pole beans a bit of a mystery. I never succeeded at Classroom in Bloom in getting like pole beans to really grow up the corn very well. I like the idea of companion planting, but I'm not real experienced with it and I find it to be challenging in this climate. It could be partly due to this sort of extreme climate that we're in. There's just like each thing kind of like needs its space to just do its thing if you want good yields. Like you start crowding stuff together, it's kind of fun and it looks cool, but you don't end up with that much food because each plant's going to have lower yields. Like the squash, for instance, wants 100% full sun. If you want high yields on your squash, you want full sun. And if you start planting it under a corn patch, you're not in full sun anymore. And then you're going to lower your yields. So it's hard to know what the best thing to do is. With the one companion planting thing that I learned about in the last few years that I'd love to share about that I think is really cool is, and I'm still like learning about it. And I wouldn't say 100% it's like solving my problems, but I think it's minorly effective and I will get better at it. But what the companion planting trick is that when you plant your broccoli in the spring in cells, like in the greenhouse, you're planting, like say you're sowing your first planting of broccoli, like March 15th or something. I don't know what you all do, but that would be like a good first planting date for the greenhouse. At the same time, sow fennel and cilantro in trays as well. And then when you plant your broccoli, plant the cilantro and fennel in a row. Like I usually plant in 2 rows that are about 2 feet apart with the plants about 2 feet apart. And then down the center row where there's nothing, plant the cilantro and fennel in a single row. And then at about the time when the aphids start coming on, the cilantro and will be flowering. And then the fennel will flower also, but it's a little bit later. So it's kind of a succession of 2 flowering things. And those 2 plants are big attractors of like, I think syrphid flies and other things that are like predators on aphids. And supposedly you can help with aphids. Not only that, but they also provide a little bit of shade, and just like broccoli just gets too hot, and so it's a way to try to reduce aphid pressure on your brassicas. You can do it with cabbage too. Is by these plants. Like I assume most of you, if you have gardens, have accidentally let your cilantro go to flower, but cilantro flowers are gorgeous, big, and they really attract a lot of beneficial insects. So I recommend letting your cilantro go to flower at various places around your garden, but also deliberately planting cilantro in with your brassicas and trying to let and fennel and let it go to flower. And dill would work too. Yeah.
Great tips. I love this. Well, you guys, it's already 9:59. Anyone last burning question? Okay, we all know where to find your seeds.
Yeah.
And
If you want, the other thing is, we don't have a lot of information about the varieties at the racks in the stores. So if you want to, I can put it in the chat. But if you want to read about what we're doing and see like pictures of the varieties and pictures of the farm and kind of read like paragraph long descriptions of each variety, rather than on the seed packets, there's like, a 4-line phrase about each variety. But if you want to read more about what the seeds are and what the varieties are, you can go to our website. We have all of our varieties on the website. It's mvseedcollective.com. I put it in the chat.
okay,
I
great.
have our collective, MV Seed Collective.
Thank you
Uh-oh, I
so much
misspelled
for
it. MV Seed Collective. Okay, try again.
fabulous. Yeah.
I think I put
think
3
it's
L's in collective. Okay, there we go.
okay. mvccollective.com. That's great. And yeah, I'll share some of this information from today in my get ready email that's going to be coming out soon. So
Yeah. All right, time to plant onions.
everyone getting ready to plant their gardens again. Right. Okay. So right now,
March
start
1st.
them from seed
Next
or
couple
the,
weeks are
or get
are
the little.
window
start-
for planting seeds. Yeah, if you want to plant seeds in your own little windowsill to have your own onion starts in the next 2 weeks. I usually do it on March 1st in case I have some failures, and then I can redo it. It gives me a cushion. So I March 1st is my onion planting date, and then also if you have like perennial flowers or snapdragons or there's a few flowers that you want to give a lot of time to, you can start planting those. So it's time, March
Okay,
1st,
great.
time to get going.
Uh-huh.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Good to see you all. Happy gardening. And yeah, we'll be back with more gardening programs. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.